Hey everyone, Rose here, and I updated my sprites. For those of you who watched my most recent painting video, you'll know that I recently updated the design for my Sona Rose. And sadly, all the sprites in my video still have the old design, so today I'm gonna be updating them. At first, I considered just taking the old sprites and editing them to fit the new design. But the designs are quite a bit different and I wanted to mess around with the expressions and stuff like that, so I ended up starting from scratch. I started out by making a very rough sketch of Rose in just a kind of neutral pose, and then went over that with another layer of sketch, this time a bit more refined, to sort of figure out the style and proportions and everything like that. I'm starting out with a very neutral expression for this one, so that way later on I don't have to redraw every individual pose manually, but I can just kind of use the transform tools to adjust this one to fit the different poses and stuff I'm gonna want. In this case, the neutral pose is gonna be a talking pose. For the old sprite, while I was making them, I made a whole bunch of very different expressions, some of them with mouth closed and some like angry and sad. But while using them while editing my videos, I realized that I really don't need most of them. I actually just need a lot of relatively neutral talking poses. So that's what I prioritized for the sprites this time. Once I had a base neutral pose done, I separated the head from the body, made separate layer groups for them, and then started duplicating them and editing them to have a bunch of slightly different expressions and poses. With the head separate from the body like this, the poses are gonna be a little bit stiff and samey because I can't move the body or the line of action very much, but it means that I can get a whole bunch of different combinations of them without having tons and tons of files. Plus, for my videos, I generally only need them for things like intros or announcements, or just generally parts where I'm just explaining something and there aren't really other visuals to go with it. So just having relatively neutral, calm, standing poses is enough. On the rare occasions that I'm gonna need something more exciting, I can always draw that specially. These sprites luckily don't take very long to make. If you want to make sprites like this for your own videos, something to keep in mind is your own kind of energy in your videos. I tend to be relatively sort of calm and laid back and not overly cheery sounding, but then also not particularly sad or anything. So having the expressions a bit toned down, I think, is gonna work a bit better for me. I noticed with some of my old sprites that the expression was way too exaggeratedly happy or even like sad or angry, and I just never got that expressive with my voice in my videos, so I always felt like it clashed a bit. But on the other hand, if you're someone who goes into your videos with a whole lot more energy and maybe are a bit more of a voice acting type, you could definitely benefit from pushing the expressions a bit further and really making your character super expressive. Speaking of pushing further, it's time for the next step, the line work and color. I started by picking out, again, a relatively neutral pose for the face and lining that with a sort of dark reddish color, and then painting it in with my regular painting brushes. For these new sprites, I didn't go with as much of a smooth, clean sort of line work and flat color style as I did for my last ones. In part because I feel like being a bit rougher fits this design a bit more, and also because I didn't want to spend really long making sure my line work was super smooth. And the same goes for the color. I just filled everything in with one flat layer to make sure the opacity was up everywhere, and then I just went in with my regular painting brushes and layered in all the different colors, making sure everything looked right but not going super in depth to make sure everything is really clean and has super smooth gradients or anything like that. And I quite like how the style ended up. It's not super clean, as I mentioned, it's a bit rough around the edges, but I feel like it's relatively representative of sort of me as an artist, which is always good. Once I had the face done, I did the same thing for the body, lining everything with my rough brush and a sort of darkish red line color, and then filling in all the colors with relatively rough brush strokes. And with that, my first sprite is complete. But I still have to color and line all the other sprites, and doing all of that manually would take ages. And it would also be super hard to get really consistent because, like, she has stripes and stuff, and making sure those look the same on every single image if I'm doing it manually would be a pain. So instead, just like I did with a sketch, I use the transform tools to just adjust all the things that I've already painted to be as close as possible to the other poses I'm doing. And then I go in with my line work brush and my painting brushes again and just quickly make some tweaks where they're needed. For example, moving around the mouth or changing the eye pose or like the rotation of the ears and stuff like that. In Krita, you can actually transform whole groups of layers, which is really practical, so you don't have to transform the line work and then the color. You can just transform everything together and then just paint in the tweaks where they're needed. I repeat this process for all the different facial expressions I have, and then do the same thing with the rest of the body. Also, pro tip, if you're gonna be doing a bunch of transforming on a line work drawing, it's probably smarter to start your drawing at a higher resolution and then scale the whole image down to the final size at the end. Because while transforming, you tend to get stuff slightly blurry, which in this case isn't gonna be too bad, I guess. But if you just want everything to have a consistent level of blur, shall we say, then scaling everything down once at the end is gonna sort of smooth everything out a bit and make it look a little bit more consistent. I didn't really do that for this one. I just kind of noticed that I should have when I was already half done with the line work, but they all ended up looking pretty fine, I guess. It's just if you're gonna be really perfectionist or you have a more neat line art kind of style than I do, it could be a bit of a bummer if you had to manually do all your line work or ended up with some blurry edges and just stuff not looking quite the way you want it to. Now all the faces are done, and like I said, it's time to move on to the body and do the same thing there. And now all the poses are pretty much done. Some of them are a bit extra rough around the edges, I guess, and I might go back off camera and tweak them a little bit or add a few more where I notice that I'm gonna need them. But for now, these are gonna do. One last thing I did do on camera though is bring in the background that I use for my videos to make sure everything works on there, and I noticed that the color I'd used for the line work is pretty similar to that background color. So as one last step, I went around all the sprites with a slightly lighter red and just brightened up the line work a little bit. That made everything stick out from the background a bit more, and that made everything a bit softer, which is very nice. And here are all the finished sprites, or at least some of them. I'm quite happy with how they turned out. I really love the new design of Rose. Might be a little bit self-indulgent to say since I made it myself, but I'm still really happy with it. She's a character I've had for quite a few years now, and she's gone through a whole bunch of changes. And there have been phases where, like, I felt she was looking a bit boring, or I didn't really like her. And this new design, I've had it now for a couple of months, and I really like it. I'm really happy with how it turned out. And I'm happy with how the sprites turned out. And that's all from me for this week. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe and all that. And if you have any questions, ask those in the comments below. If you're interested in seeing more of my art stuff or just hanging out and chatting, I have my social media as well as the Discord server linked in the description below. Anyway, I hope you all have a nice rest of your day and see you all next time.